Hello athletes, this is Travis from GTS Rowing. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to prepare and where to place your hands at the front end of the stroke to ensure a direct, immediate transfer of power from the feet to the flywheel as you initiate your drive sequence. We're going to talk, not only am I going to show you kind of what you need to be doing with your hands at the front end, but we're also going to dive into why you want to do that, because it's very important for me and my videos in this channel to ensure that you not only know what to do, but you want to know why you're doing it, and you understand the kind of the theory behind it, because I'm a big believer that if you understand why you're doing something, you can do it more effectively and more consistently. All right, so I'm going to step back, we're going to readjust the camera, and let's dive in. All right, first it's important to understand how the forces are working through your body and into the flywheel as we're applying power on that handle. And in particular, we want to understand that for the indoor rower, your chain is connected to a cog that's connected to that flywheel. All right, and so that cog is going to be your point of contact. And your effective point of impulse or transfer power to the machine is not your hands, but rather it's your shoulder. All right, so as we're coming out of the front end of the stroke, we should be in this catch position. All right, we have connected our hands to our feet with our positioning of the body. All right, and that the mover of impulse or the provider of impulse coming out of the front end is going to be primarily the legs, and then it's going to move to the body. All right, so at no point in the front of the stroke are those hands to be providing impulse and work on that flywheel. The draw of the hand, the bringing the elbow back, is for later in the stroke. All right, and so what those arms, the function that the arms are providing is twofold. One, you've got to connect your body to the handle by gripping, and two, you've got to connect the handle to your shoulder and to your body through your arm. And you don't want to think about your arm as a source of impulse at this point. What you want to do is you want to think about your arm as a rope, all right, or something loose that can be under tension that is connecting your shoulder to the handle first and then to the cog on the machine next. All right, and it's very important to separate the hand and handle connection from that system when you're applying power at the front end. And the best way to think about it is if you think you have two ropes, all right, one is connected to a weight and the other you're holding, and between those two ropes you have two little carabiners that are hooked into each other. All right, and so when you pull up on that rope, all right, to provide work on whatever the other end of that rope is connected to, those carabiners are connecting the two parts of that system, but there is no work happening there. All right, everything is under tension with the hand and the weight providing the resistance. All right, and if you just turn that metaphor sideways, your hand and that handle are the two carabiners connecting the chain, and from the handle to the chain, and then from the hands and the arm up to the shoulder. All right, so your real 2 points of focus are your shoulder and that cog, and that everything between the shoulder and the cog needs to fall within the same vector. All right, and so what you want to focus on in terms of preparing your handle for the front end is that before you're actually going to do effective work on that flywheel, all right, you need to create that vector between your shoulder and that cog, which means your handle needs to be directly along that vector. All right, and so I see a lot of athletes at all levels, all right, varsity high school kids, collegiate rowers, certainly any rowers that I take on that are, through a CrossFit or self-taught online, will almost always come in to the front end with their hands low, and when they start to push, they're providing tension on that, and what happens is suddenly that handle jerks into the vector that's created between our shoulder and your handle. In that moment where that handle is jerking into position to apply power from your shoulders to the cog is a moment that you're not actually doing work. And it's also a moment, depending on how you approach the catch, you'll put a little bit of kind of a jerk and a tension in your transfer mechanism through the back. And so that instead of a smooth application of picking up, you kind of get this kind of, you know, slamming action and kind of jerk around, which is not good for the back, especially when you're doing 500 to 1,000 to 1,500 reps during the course of a workout. And so that's where your hand needs to be as you're applying power, all right? Directly within that vector, directly between that cog and your shoulder. And now the next trick is you need to ensure that the handle is in that position before you reach the catch position, all right? And so that comes into how you're kind of preparing as you're coming up. Essentially, you want to establish your body over position, and then as your knees rise, the handle should be rising as well. And it should be rising into the position that it needs to be for that direct application of power. If you're low and you apply power, what's going to happen is that the handle is going to jerk up right away. Whereas if you have prepared the handle effectively coming into the front end, then you should just move straight back. There should be no vertical motion of the handle as you're applying pressure at the front end of the stroke. And that's going to ensure that as soon as you start to press into the foot stretchers, all right, all that power is transferring through your body, through your shoulder, through your arm, through the handle and chain, directly into the flywheel, all right? So, some drills to ensure that we can do this, all right? I like to just have rowers pausing a body over, and then as their legs lift, the handle lifts as well, all right? And you want to think about the arms in the situation. You can think of a couple ways. You can think about your arm as a 2x4, all right? So it's just one straight thing. There's no bending and lifting there. There's no action in the wrist to lift up. It is just your arm is a 2x4 that is connected to your shoulder, and it's going to lift into the front end. Now, I prefer the analogy of imagine that arm is straight and it's just filling with helium as you come forward, all right? So to give that feeling of your handle very lightly floating up into position at the front end, so that when you get to the catch, you can just press without having to worry about that handle getting jerked into position. All right, so you can do that with a pause each stroke. So we're there, we're paused, we compress, the handle rises into position so that when we push, we just push directly back, all right? Now another cue you can use for this is the rectangle that your chain is traveling through at the front end. You can see where the chain falls within that rectangle as you're coming and approaching the front end. And what you can do to kind of check is take a couple strokes and really pay attention to what height that chain is as you're going through the drive, all right? So watch the chain on the drive. You will notice that the chain will slightly come down a little bit as you drive, all right? Because you're basically increasing or decreasing the height of the hypotenuse of a triangle, all right, as you get farther away from that cog, all right? So that's a normal action. But what you really want to pay attention to is what is the height of the chain at the beginning of that drive phase. And you need to ensure that as you compress with the legs that the chain rises to that point so that when you press, all right, the chain stays at that point, all right? And that as you go through the drive, the chain will very gradually lower in that rectangle as you drive into the release position. Again, because the release is farther away from that chain, and depending on how tall or short you are, it's going to depend on kind of where that chain ends up at the end of your drive, all right? So you're paying attention to that, and you can go through, and if you sit, I'm sitting at a body over position now, all right? So the chain is a little bit lower, just slightly below halfway, and that as I compress, my hands rise as if they're filling with that helium. My chain is where it needs to be for a direct change, for change of direction there, all right? So direct power application. So I see my chain floats up, and I like to use these bolts. So you got a bolt on the side here, and you got a little indentation here, that the chain for almost all athletes is gonna be at or higher than that height, all right? It's very rare you're gonna have an athlete that can be in a good, effective catch position with the chain below that, all right? So you're looking at somewhere here to here, depending on how tall the athlete is, or more importantly, just how high they sit off because of the length of their torso, all right? So we're between here and here, and it is okay while you're doing this to exaggerate on the high end, all right? Because it is going to be a more natural motion for the chain to settle down than to settle up, all right? Because if you're settling down, that motion is going to come, the hands are just going to kind of relax into place. Whereas if you're down, that's when you're going to get a lot of that kind of jerking in the body, all right? So use the chain in this rectangle, all right, to gauge, are you preparing? And you can look a little bit farther and you can see where that handle catcher is on the erg. And I like to tell my athletes, and I like to train myself, is that as the handle gets over that handle catcher, by that time you should be at the height of the catch, all right? So you're coming up, you rise, I'm over the handle catcher, my handle is at the height that it needs to be for the front end. I continue the compression and take my stroke. And there you have it. That's how we want to think about preparing our hands to the front end. Think about that relaxed float, all right? Really try to be loose in the arms. Remember, your arms are the rope under tension, all right? The rope itself doesn't provide any power. All right, the rope simply transfers the power from whatever's pulling on the rope to the load it's connected to. And in this case, what's pulling on that rope of your arm combined with the chain is your shoulder, all right, as it's connected to the rest of your body. And then the load is gonna be that cog, all right? And that rope, all right, of the chain with a carabiner at the end and the arms with another carabiner at the end, creating a single connection point, all right? One is your elbow and the other is the cog for the erg, all right? And they have to work together. If you artificially lower, all right, that connection point with your hands, or artificially are too high, which is very rare, and I actually sometimes say exaggerate on the high end because it will self-correct easier than the other, all right? But if you are low, then one, if you're just an indoor rower, it's just gonna cause that moment, that split second where your handle is jerking into position, and during that moment, you're not actually doing work on the flywheel, but you are kind of jamming a lot of effort and energy into your back. If you're an on the water rower, that's even more important, because if you're on the water rower, that means that your blade is not in the water when you start applying your power, and with that it's called check, all right? So if your coach is talking about check, that's essentially what's happening, is that you're jamming your feet down on the foot stretcher without your blade leveraged in the water, and you're gonna push the boat back and everybody's gonna kind of get their little jerk forward. It's no fun. And especially for on the water rowers, I really do encourage my athletes when we're making this change to kind of over exaggerate on the high side, because in the water, if you just place your blade a little bit early, no big deal, just begin your drive, all right? And also, if you are raising it a little bit too early, there's like an instinctual aspect where a rower will just not put the blade in before they should, if they're lifting a little bit sooner than everybody else. So there are a couple things when you're coaching the rowing stroke that are self-correcting from the perspective of exaggeration. And so there are a lot of things I'll exaggerate that will self-correct, but there are other things that you could exaggerate that would not self-correct, all right? And in this case, an exaggeration could be keeping your hands low. Rather, we consider that the error. We consider the exaggeration to be a little high, because the hands will self-correct to low, all right? If you're an indoor rower, same thing, all right? Over exaggerating a little high is gonna be fine. If you bring that chain to the top of the rectangle, that's fine. What you want to avoid at all costs is having the chain low and having that sudden jerk up of the hands as you begin the drive sequence. So I hope this helped. I hope you guys kind of understand how the physics are working and how the kind of the function, the preparation helps, you apply more direct power application on the front end. Again, check out my work on this channel or GTS Rowing if you're looking for a little bit of guidance. I also encourage you guys to hop on Patreon, throw a little bucks in if you appreciate this work and you want to kind of contribute to my efforts to educate the community. But that link will be in the description. Thanks for your time. I hope that helped. Let me know in the comments if it does. It's always nice to know that things are improving the strokes of the people watching. Thanks again. We'll catch you on the next video. Bye.